Welcome, everyone, to the Peace Podcast. This episode is a special one because I have a guest here with me today, and we are going to be talking about breaking those societal stereotypes and how we make that happen. But before I get there, let me introduce my special guest to you. So this is John Wang. He is the author of Big Asian Energy and a TEDx speaker. He has his own podcast, so make sure you tune into that. It's called Big Asian Energy, and he has amassed over 240,000 followers and more than 25 million views. And he has his influence focused around discussing leadership, communication, and cultural authenticity. And he has really been able to help individuals break through those societal stereotypes by sharing how he personally navigated those cultural challenges. And oh, wait, let's not skip over the fact that his experience spans from working with diverse groups from Fortune 500 companies to those emerging entrepreneurs. So welcome, John. Thanks for being here.
It is so great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, of course. So we're going to dive right in because I want to make sure that we get to all the things. So when we think about our experiences and kind of what led us to the place that we are with our influence, what's the moment that really just was that catalyst for this journey for you?
I think that, growing up, I'm Asian, and growing up as an Asian North American, it's an interesting experience because, of course, people will always see all of us, any of us. We're not a monolith, but every one of us, when people encounter us, are going to have an idea of who you are based on that first couple of moments that they first connect with. And I never realized how much it was affecting me, not just in the way that others are perceiving me, but also in the way that I perceive myself. Because that's actually how we index, is we look at how other people deal with us, and then we kind of create an imprint that then shapes how we will show up to fit in, to succeed, to thrive, whatever it is that our goals are. So really that concept of how do I show up with others played a big role in my upbringing, in my work, and in my coaching with other people.
And so you talk about your experience and that you are Asian. And so how were the way you showed up and the way people perceived you very different experiences?
Well, that's a great question. So one of the biggest things that I grew up and I came across as a study was the concept of this stereotype content model. So before I dive into the science and the studies behind that, I'll simplify to say people always assumed that because I'm Asian, that I'm a number of different things, that I will be a little bit more quiet. I will be a little bit more technically proficient. And a lot of times I think that there's this gap of understanding, or even that I will be a cold, which is a strange thing. Until one day I realized when I was doing research around this that there's actually studies on it. So back in 2002, there was a group of social psychologists, including, one of the most famous ones is Amy Cuddy, who talked about presence and, how we show up. And they basically did a survey on how people are viewed and across these four metrics or on four areas, which is based on, are you considered to be high competence or low competence, and high warmth or low warmth. So if you ever wondered what makes somebody charismatic, if you ever come across somebody and you're like, wow, like that person is really charismatic, the truth is that idea of charisma is only based on those two things: how competent you come across, or how confident or capable, and how warm you come across. And I hadn't realized this, but one of the major stereotypes that I think many people, there's different groups, for example, actually high achieving women oftentimes fall into this group as well as Asians, Jews, rich people. I don't know how exactly they found those categorizations, is that they're often seen as highly competent, like they're good at what they do, but cold. And that really affected how I felt, whether I belonged. And a lot of times that might be in meetings or rooms where I would be in, and I feel like there's a little bit distancing that I could feel internally. I didn't really know if people really saw me or accepted me for who I am. And oftentimes those related to things like stereotypes, those related to things like gut assumptions, or oftentimes there's this concept in the Asian American community called the model minority myth, which is basically the idea that as model minorities, we are, good at doing work and keeping our head down and staying quiet, but that we might not be good leaders, we might not be seen as highly charismatic or creative or capable. And all of those things affect how it is that we're perceived or even our career paths.
Yeah. Yeah. And, things that you're speaking about are resonating with me as an educator, because oftentimes we talk about how this being educated in cultural instruction is like super imperative to being a good teacher. And one of the things that we talk about often is the assumptions that are made about students. And, something that has resonated with me because I've seen it happen so often is when a student is Asian, it is just assumed that they're going to be good at math, that they're going to be able to do all the techie things, that their parents are going to be fully immersed in their education, and that they have no space to have emotions, because those are the things that people often associate with the Asian cultures. And it's interesting to me because when that isn't the case, it's almost as if people don't know what to do with that type of student. And I'm like, well, if you have, the white students or the Spanish speaking students or your Black students, you make those same assumptions too. And the only students that quote unquote, what to do with are the ones who look like you. And so let's broaden our perspective on the fact that just the same way that no one in a certain geographical area, no one in a certain country, no one in a certain, race is the same, that exists for Asian students too. And because I taught in a place where there weren't a lot of Asian students, that assumption was made often. And so I'm wondering if any of your experiences date back to those elementary years where those typical things happen to you as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You hear a lot of things like anything from, at the very early stages, you speak surprisingly good English, which I have gotten multiple times.
Wow.
Of course, there's a lot of assumptions about your culture, your capabilities. Everyone thought I will be good at math, and I'm actually terrible at math. It's just one of those ways that I defy the stereotype, as much as my parents tried. But I think that it's exactly what it's exactly what you're referring to, which is a part of that mono minority myth is that, Asians are doing fine. Because the way we index it is basically based on academic capability. And they see that a lot of Asian students, as you say, when we do get them in the classrooms, they tend to be seen as being a little bit more quiet, or maybe they just don't know how to speak up for their needs. And
Mhm.
then there's this assumption that, as long as they're pretty quiet, they're well behaved, then they don't need that much attention, which might be true to a certain extent. But what I found, for example, one of the biggest struggles I had when I was going through those years, for example, is knowing how to speak up. Like knowing how
Mhm.
to raise my hand, knowing how to speak up for myself. And there were even times where I was marked negatively for it, or I was seen negatively for it. I'll be told, you just got to speak up more. It's like you're too shy. But the truth is that I wasn't actually shy. I just had different cultural teachings coming into it.
Mhm.
You know, when when I was growing up in my more Asian cultural family, I learned a lot about, like hierarchy, for example, that, you don't speak up unless you have something really, really, really important to say, because otherwise you're breaking that hierarchy. With a
Mhm.
teacher around, with somebody who's older around, it's your job to stay quiet. So the idea of speaking up for your needs, you're either seen as weak or you're seen as somehow you're breaking the rules just by even, getting seen. And that was something that even throughout high school, I really struggled against, is just being accepted for being who I am. And also just being treated as if like there is no difference in that racial difference, for example.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So when the listeners are hearing this, I'm sure there are things that they're resonating with. And from your perspective, what's something that they should be mindful of when their origin story does create that judgment or skewed perspective from them in adulthood, and they feel like they're still battling against those same things from their childhood?
It's a great question. So we are always dealing with assumptions, all of us, anyone that you come across. Um, one of the biggest things, speaking of education, for example, is we have a lot of attachment to expectations of stories. I have heard my clients who are either students or, once they're in adulthood in the workplace, they'll say things like, "Oh, I'm from Vietnam," and people automatically would jump to either, "Oh, like, did you go through war?" or are you a refugee, or those kind of assumptions. It shocks me how often those things come up, or like the thing that we usually make that first assumption on is what people jump into, and that could feel very othering. Because when you're in a conversation, such a small thing, but we've probably all heard of that. Like, "Oh, where are you from?" And you're like, "Oh, I'm from, Seattle. I'm from Chicago." And then people go, "No, no, no. Where are you really from?" Like, it's totally fine, by the way, to accept that we are curious about one another and their upbringing. But oftentimes, even questions like that, or assumptions of like, "Oh, you look like you're Japanese. I know some other Japanese people," is that it becomes the identity that you're kind of boxed into. Then you're not really
Mm.
getting seen for all the other variations of you, which is what everyone gets to be, which is just you. And if we
Yeah.
encounter this, it is a little bit of a learning experience. I always like to treat it with the best intention of like, oh, the other person is looking to educate themselves on this, even if I don't feel like I want to be the educator sometimes. But I think that communication and building bridges is really important. So it depends on what kind of issues we're running into. And the most common one is just that feeling of othering. And I always say, if we want to break through that, us, the person on the other side of it, is to say, well, we can answer the question and then ask deeper about the other
Mm.
person's background and use that to build a cultural bridge and then find where our commonality is. And then if you're the person who is meeting somebody, maybe take a moment and ask, well, why would that matter? Why does that assumption of somebody's physical appearance differ from how you might meet somebody who looks more like you, for example?
Yeah, so really placing that emphasis on being curious from both ends. The curiosity of they want to be more educated, so I'm going to get curious about what it is that they want to know, but then also the curiosity on the other end, and having the ownership of, I'm going to ask questions to be curious so that I don't make those assumptions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is
Yeah.
entirely possible that the Asian American person you're talking to does have great math skills. I know many of my friends do. But in that assumption that we carry, we kind of give them no room to be anything else. So it is important to still treat and explore the other person from a place of, I like to say, is on both sides. It's always about compassionate curiosity, which is understanding that that person is just a human being. We're all human beings, of course. And am I saying anything right now that might create the sensation that we don't see them as such? Right? Would I
Yeah.
say to somebody as I, would somebody who looks like me?
Yeah, absolutely. That's so good, because I think sometimes we forget that human part of it. It's like my curiosity takes precedent over the way that you're going to receive this from me. And I think that when we get into adulthood and our core wounds come from those types of things, people don't take a second to really think about how that could be accessing a core wound that they don't really know exists for that person. So I love that. So when you're thinking about I guess hot topics now are, childhood trauma and how to bring the healing into your life and how to address those core wounds and how to break free from what you've experienced as part of the things that you're saying. And then you think about your own origin story and how you've gotten to where you are. What's something that you are holding on to about your origin story and also using in the things that you teach people to educate them and empower them as well?
Oh, that's interesting. So we could open up that box of just saying, yeah. Personally, I grew up with, quote unquote traditional Asian parents. And what that means and where that stereotype of, oftentimes we use terms like tiger parents or such like that. Really, it comes from that there is an immigrant culture around, look, for survival and for belonging, it is important that you achieve academic and work success. Right.
Mm.
So on the surface, there is a really positive message behind it. It's like, yeah, we're coming to a different place. We're sacrificing our background as parents so that we could give you the best opportunities. And sometimes that opportunity looks just like go be a doctor, go be a lawyer, or go be an engineer, because those are the ones that are known and trusted.
Mhm.
But I think that it's important as when I went through my own healing journey, is to acknowledge both sides, that the intention is there and how it could have left an imprint, because
Mm.
we all take on conditioning. And what I mean by conditioning is kind of like, if we're taught that this is how you're supposed to act in the world, this is how you're supposed to act to be accepted in your family. This is the role that you take on in society, at work, at home, all these things. They're just layers of kind of like scripts. Imagine that you go to work and the first person that sees you goes, okay, this is who I expect you to be. So here's a script of what that person
Mm.
will sound like. And if you say those things that are part of that script, I might laugh, or I might give you more approval, or I might go, well, that's great. Like, now you're one of us. And so for me, there was a lot of shape shifting. And I'll share a little bit more about what that feels like as a shape shifting. Is that, we use terms like code switching, for example. It's not to say that code switching is inherently problematic. We all code switch. We code switch when we talk to our families at home, and then we code switch when we go to our workplace. We have our, innie and outie selves. You have to use the TV show from Severance. I'm not sure if you watched it, but the idea behind our work selves or our true selves oftentimes can create such a gap that we lose track of who we really are. And how that will show up in our day to day is that after a while, we start to question our own belonging in that space.
Mm.
And it could be really tough if you've grown up with that pressure of, okay, this is the only way you could be accepted in your family, to gain the approval of your parents, to gain the approval of your greater extended family and community. And when I say approval, it doesn't only have to come in, oh, you're only allowed to do this, but maybe you have a sibling who became a doctor and now they're getting a lot more attention, or maybe you have a cousin who got into a certain school or went to a certain, workplace or company, and they now get all the attention. And those inherently condition you to think, oh, maybe what I'm doing isn't good enough.
Mm.
And then compounded us to how we show up and are experienced in our society. That's oftentimes where I see people burning out. That's oftentimes where I see people feeling overextended, because they don't know how to manage and balance between them and still be seen as a leader, still be seen as somebody who's highly capable by their boss, by their workplace. And I think that's where that split can get really tough.
Mm. You said the word balance and it struck something in me because I think that the messaging of today is that if you want to become who you want to become, that you have to break off the thing that created that version of you that couldn't become it, that constricted you or restricted you from becoming it. When you say the word balance, it sounds like you can still honor the system that brought you to this place while also breaking free from some of the things that you've had to carry with you that aren't necessarily serving you.
Absolutely. And the word that there's a term that describes this, and there's a difference between what's called bicultural integration, which is to say, for people who come from one culture and are living in another culture, we usually look at that. So, for example, I'm from, you know, Taiwan, let's say. My parents are from Taiwan. So I grew up with that. Even though I grew up in North America, my environment is a westernized culture.
Yeah.
And usually our assumption is that that means that we're trying to assimilate, right? And assimilation sounds great. We're trying to blend in with the mainstream, so to speak. But oftentimes what that's being taught is, oh, wow, that difference could be so big. Maybe I went to school and I packed a lunch and, that lunch isn't what my peers are, my classmates are eating. And sometimes we get made fun for it. Sometimes that, attracted a certain amount of unwanted attention because as probably most people have felt, the worst thing you can be when you're going through school during those precious adolescent ages is different.
Yeah.
Different is dangerous. Different is distancing. So we learn to hide that part. And assimilation is all about that message. And I think there's a misunderstanding around what true assimilation is, and even what makes cultures like North America so great is actually integration. So, how do
Mm.
we love the heritage that we're from and find a way to integrate that into how we show up and interact with others? How do we still keep the things from our past that we think are still valid, valued, and useful so that we can be better at contributing them to our environment and society? Because truthfully, monolithic cultures are not the best, in my opinion. I really do believe in bringing more different thoughts, perspective, and experiences, so long as we share the same core values in that shared, environment.
Yeah. And so you work with a lot of people who are in these leadership roles or trying to get themselves in these leadership roles. So, what are you seeing as something that's like the standout that kind of aligns with what we're talking about now? And when you see it, what advice are you giving to continue on their leadership journey while also embracing that, but then making tweaks to it?
Hmm. Well, the first one I always address is there are a lot of misunderstandings, right? Because that's really where stereotypes come from. Stereotypes are misunderstandings. Stereotypes are basically mass generated and say, okay, well, if I see 3 or 4 instances of this, it must apply to everyone. But a lot of times that misunderstanding comes from a lack of cultural bridging. I'll use
Mm,
an example. One of the biggest comments I often hear, especially from my Asian clients who are in those companies, is they're seen as being too quiet, not assertive enough. They're lacking leadership gravitas or, leadership presence, executive presence, or whatever term. They always come to me with these terms and they just get really, really like, oh, we just don't hear your voice enough. And a lot of that is coming back to what we talked about earlier. If you were taught that speaking up is breaking the social rules of your
mm,
family, then you also learn not to do that in your work environment. If you were taught that meritocracy means that you have to first prove your worth by working really, 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 really hard, and then maybe you deserve to have your ideas heard, that will impact how you show up. And if you have a disruptive idea, and disruptive ideas are great. We like disruptive ideas because that's what gets us moving forward. But when we haven't yet been taught that that's an okay thing to share, that miscommunication leads us to holding back our true
mm.
selves. So
Yeah.
when I talk to a lot of times these people and they're either going into executive leadership roles or they are already in executive leadership roles, they come and they say, well, how do I speak more commandingly? How do I speak more assertively? When I say, well, first and foremost, recognize that you don't have to pretend to be anybody else. You don't have to look like what another person's idea of leadership look like. We just have to take a look at where it is that the core center is. Are you speaking your truth because you genuinely believe in it, or are you saying it because you expect other people to like it? Right? That kind of people pleasing behavior. Could we shut that out? Could we see what's underneath that? And then really take a look at, well, what is the core message? A lot of times that also shows up in our own, I would say, limiting beliefs. And
Mm,
limiting beliefs often comes into, well, I don't know if my idea is good enough to be shared. I don't know if I've earned enough. I don't know if I've, have the credentials. I don't know if who's going to give me permission, gosh darn it, to step into leadership? And I always go, you. You give yourself the permission because nobody else is going to come tap you on the shoulders to do it. So, do you believe that something you're sharing with the world is currently in alignment with your values? Great, then unapologetically go for it. Speak to this and use the people around you as a sounding board. And trust that if they're disagreeing, and they might, you know, if they're disagreeing, they're not disagreeing with you. They're not disapproving of you, just your ideas. So
Mm.
decouple yourself from the belief that how you show up is who you are supposed to be.
Whew, that's so good. That is so good. And I'm making such a connection with the lunch story that you gave, because if for so many years different is the bad thing, right? Because I want to belong. I want, especially those middle school years. I would never go back to those if someone paid me. I just, no, thank you. Um, but when you're thinking about how, when you're labeled as different, that becomes the enemy, then you go into this work environment or even relational environments, and you're afraid to broach the topic of your great idea because it's different than everyone else's. But in those environments and atmospheres, the difference is what sets you apart. And the difference is also what could be the catalyst for change. But when you've lived so many years trying to not be different, or, downplaying your differences, it's only natural to say, I'm going to shy away from what makes me different because belonging is the thing, you know?
Absolutely. Yeah, you
Yeah.
nailed it. So that practice, that muscle of trusting in your intuition, trusting in your own messaging, despite the fact that it might feel a little bit tense, that our nervous system might get a little bit activated, is something that just takes time to build, but it takes that persistent and willing to show up in small ways each time, setting a boundary. When
Mm,
somebody is asking you something that you don't quite agree with, being a little bit more disagreeable. And we slowly build that up over days or weeks. And then after that, we start seeing more of that leadership, creativity, assertiveness really step into our power.
yeah. And that's a perfect segue into my next question, which is, I record a lot of content about peace because I think that, most people that I know are searching for some form of peace in their lives. And I would imagine that, and also know from my own experience, that having to stifle yourself, not feeling fully confident in your knowing and your intuition and your ideas and just the value that you bring to the table can cause a certain amount of chaos.
Mhm.
And I think that when you're thinking about stereotypes and the societal stereotypes, sometimes you are judged for something that chaos walks in the room before you ever even do. So how do we achieve that peace that we're all striving for if we're not able to change the thing that's causing us the stress? Like, we can't change how society perceives us. We can't change how people have viewed us. We can't change how difficult it is to find that sense of belonging in our origin stories. So how do we find that peace when we can't change the thing that's creating so much chaos?
Oh, love this question. So here's a tool I love. Grab a piece of paper, fold it into three columns or have three columns. On the column on the very left, I often have people write my family values. So whatever your parents' values are, and this, by the way, doesn't mean
Mm,
that this is everyone. It doesn't matter if you're from one
yeah.
culture or another culture. It doesn't matter. We all have
Yep.
family values and lessons that we hold. And on the very right, we write down either wherever it is that we feel that most amount of that disconnect. Maybe that's where we feel the most lonely. Maybe that's where you feel
Mm,
the most disconnected, unseen, whatever that is. Oftentimes that's workplace or whatever it is. And, those are the social values. So what do my environment values? And then in the center column is where we write, what is it that I truly value? Because I think at the core of it, if we really talk about, my book is called Big Asian Energy because it really is about authentic self ownership, this radical self ownership. Like what you truly believe in are in your core values that are in betterment of yourself and the people around you. This is where you have something to shine. This is where your true light becomes. So identifying what those values are and going, is this in alignment with my values? Is this in alignment with something I truly believe in? Great. Then own it unapologetically. Then
Hmm.
show up, even if you are different, even if others might judge you for it or whatever it is, as long as it's not harming anyone or whatever it is a chance for you to share something that really lights you up. That's where we get the greatest amount of growth.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And, when I think about how I have, recorded other episodes with similar tools, like this one kind of takes it to that next level, which is telling yourself to unapologetically show up, not feeling you have to pick between the family value or what your circumstances asking of you, but just saying, this is what I'm in alignment with, this is who I am, and this is how I'm going to show up. I think that will give you the confidence to say, no matter what is being perceived of me, like I'm going to be fully and 100% authentically me. And whatever happens as a result of that is what's supposed to happen.
Heck yes, yes. As they
I
say,
feel
can I
like
get a
that's,
hallelujah? It is a Sunday. Ooh,
yes,
that felt good. Nice
amen.
called it. And that exactly is. And I love doing body checks, gut checks. Just do a gut check. Does this feel like a heck yes? Does this feel strong? Does this feel like it's something that is important to you? Or do you feel like you're doing it to get an outcome? Do you feel like you're doing it to please other
Mm,
people? Do you feel like you're doing it because there's some level of obligation that doesn't feel good and it kind of makes you want to hide a little bit, like, makes you feel a little bit smaller? Those are the moments that I think are most critical of how do we speak up for ourselves? Because that's really
yeah,
when we tell our inner selves, our inner child that, no, we're here to play. We're ready to go. We have value,
yeah,
we have light, and we're ready to bring it.
yeah. And something that I always talk about is the asking yourself, is this a me problem, a them problem, or an us problem? And I think that resonates so well in this space because is it something I'm carrying because of whatever was placed on me? And now I'm assuming things of them because of something that's going on internally with me. Are they really having that perception of me and treating me this certain way? So is that a them problem or is it a dance we're doing inside of the space? And if that's the case, then it's an us problem. And it could just be the culture of the environment you're in. It could just be the poor habits of a certain boss that you're experiencing. But you have to know that because some things you'll take ownership of that are really a them problem. And sometimes you'll place accountability on them when it's really a you problem. And so
Mhm.
this kind of helps you to do that. It's like, do you align with that expectation? Is this really of you? And now that you're in this space, what are you going to do? And what are you going to refrain from doing? And what part of that is because of your own self and not because of all these things that we like to blame it on, you know?
Yes, 100%. And I think
Yeah.
I love that framework of, is it a you, me, or us? In that framework, I always take a look at it and I go, am I trying to make myself smaller to give other people more room? Am I making myself 30% so they can be 70%? And I always love to remind people, no, you being at your 100% is what gives the other person permission for them to be at their 100%. And
So
that's how
good.
we're always at our best.
So good. That's the mic drop moment right there. And so, as we
Woo.
come to the end of this, I have to ask this final question that I like to ask all of my guests, which is thinking about all of the content that we just gave to everyone and your experience with dealing with this subject matter. If you had a magic wand that you could only use on this topic, what would you use it to do?
Hmm. Uh, Can you give me sorry, just because I want to understand the question a little bit more.
Yep.
When you say like a magic wand, if it's like a tool,
Yes. So, like, if I could wave that magic wand and fix something inside of this space, the dynamics that we just talked about, what's the one thing that I would fix that would create the largest impact?
it's the stories we tell ourselves that create shame. It's always the stories we tell ourselves that create shame because shame is one of the things that causes that need to hide. And the shame is usually coming from a judgment that we at some point took on that actually doesn't apply in most of our day to day. So examining where those shame stories, those beliefs are coming from is the core of it. And this is coming where that unapologetic self-ownership is. Letting go of the perfectionism is saying, I am imperfect, but I love the parts of me that are imperfect because that's where the light comes from. The cracks are where the light comes from.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing.
Did that answer?
Well, yeah, that is so it's a great one. It's a perfect one.
Beautiful.
So I appreciate you greatly for all of this wisdom. I think the perspective is so valuable for my listeners, as well as those tangible things to do, right in front of you right now. And so I'm going to make sure that I link the book and all things John Wang in the show notes. So when you guys get there, make sure that you tune in for more. You can check him out on, all the socials. He has a YouTube channel. The podcast is amazing. And so I want to make sure that you guys go check out more from him, because this is just a very small drop in the bucket of the plethora of knowledge that is John Wang. So make sure that you tune into those things. And I'm just going to ask you, John, do you have one final thought or anything you want to make sure hits home with our listeners?
Start today. Ask yourself and check in with your body. Where are you still hiding? And go show up big. You can find my book, Big Asian Energy, anywhere you find books. And reach out. I love connecting with people.
Amazing. Thank you, John. I appreciate you. And as you guys know, knowledge gained and kept to yourself is selfish, but knowledge gained and shared with the world may just be the catalyst that they need to break free from the bondage that they're experiencing. So if this message resonated with you, and even if it didn't, make sure you go share it with everyone that you know so that they can get the knowledge that they need to break free from their own bondage. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you again next time.